Welcome to today's deep dive. Imagine trying to solve a massive global supply chain crisis, but you're, only allowed to consult a textbook on classical poetry.
You completely fail, right?
Exactly. You'd fail.
Yeah.
Because the real world's problems are massively interconnected, but the way we actually learn about the world is, well, completely siloed.
Yeah, we treat physics, economics, and philosophy like they just live on completely different planets. And that's exactly what Dr. Pramod Ambadasrao Pawar's book, GASR 6.0, The Pramod Effect, really digs into. It argues that humanity isn't actually suffering from a crisis of ignorance. We're suffering from a crisis of disconnected knowledge.
Right, so our mission for you today is to unpack Dr. Pawar's blueprint for tearing down those academic silos. We're looking at how to completely rewire how we think, learn, and, solve problems. To do that, the text relies on a philosophy called monism, the idea that all existence is just one unified reality.
Exactly. And the engine driving that unity is a redefined concept of shunya. Normally, we translate shunya as emptiness or a void, but the text reframes it as a neutral state of balanced potential.
Right, and the book actually uses a really specific mathematical equation for this. It's 1 minus 1 equals 0, which leads to 0 equals 1.
Which sounds like a total riddle, I know.
It does. I was trying to visualize this, and I just kept picturing a glitchy, totally overloaded Wi-Fi router. You have all these conflicting, overlapping signals causing a massive jam.
Yeah, and you can't just force a connection through that mess.
Exactly. You have to power it down. You reset the conflicting signals to 0, that neutral state of shunya we just mentioned. And only from that total neutrality can you broadcast a single, unified, working connection. The one.
That's a really great way to put it. In that formula, the 1 minus 1 represents those oppositions essentially canceling each other out so they can reach neutrality. Unity isn't achieved by just ignoring differences, right? It's achieved by neutralizing opposing forces so they reach this state of equilibrium.
Okay, but if you're listening to this and thinking, well, neutralizing forces sounds great for a router, but how do I actually do that when I'm, say, reading a book or analyzing a policy? The text offers this method called trans-deconstruction.
Right,
But
trans-deconstruction.
usually, deconstruction just means tearing a concept apart until it means absolutely nothing. How does putting trans in front of it change the actual mechanism?
Well, traditional deconstruction leaves you with just a pile of dismantled parts. Trans-deconstruction adds a mandatory second step. It breaks rigid structures down to eliminate strict binaries, but then it forces you to reintegrate those pieces into a new, coherent whole.
Wait, reintegrate them how?
So the text illustrates this using the legendary singer Lata Mangeshkar. We generally view life and death as an absolute rigid binary. But trans-deconstruction neutralizes that binary by viewing her art as an eternal consciousness.
Oh, I see. Because her voice continues to shape culture, so it transcends physical death. Okay, I see how that works for music or art, but bringing it back to our original problem-solving real-world crises. Neutralizing a binary like life and death seems, pretty abstract.
It does, yeah.
So how does an artistic concept actually help a student fix, say, a heavily polluted river?
Well, it works by training the brain to stop seeing the world in strict either-or categories. If a student is trained to neutralize the binary of, say, economic growth versus environmental protection, they stop arguing about which side has to lose.
Right, they integrate both into a unified solution, like designing profitable green technology or something.
Exactly. That mental flexibility is the entire core of Dr. Pawar's proposed global school system, which is called GASR 6.0.
Right, and this is a 3-phase education model. Instead of just memorizing facts, a student's journey starts with a foundation in core concepts, moves into an integration phase where they actively link math to art or science to history.
Which is huge, yeah.
And then it finishes with an application phase entirely focused on real-world problem solving. But hold on, I get the theory. But mechanically, how does a teacher actually grade a student's unified consciousness?
It sounds impossible, right?
Yeah. You can't just hand out a multiple-choice test to see if a 12-year-old has neutralized their binaries.
Well, traditional standardized testing gets thrown out completely in this model. The text introduces 2 new proprietary metrics. There's the alignment quotient, or AQ, and the Pramod impact factor, or PIF.
Wait, are those just tracking how well a student memorizes that trans-deconstruction formula we talked about?
No, not at all. They measure applied synthesis. So instead of taking an isolated history test and a completely separate physics test, a student might be tasked with designing a hypothetical water filtration system for a historical drought.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the teacher uses AQ and PIF to calculate how effectively the student aligned the historical context, the scientific principles, and the ethical implications into one working model. It measures the connections they build, not just the trivia they retain.
That's fascinating. Imagine how drastically different your career would look right now if your entire education had been evaluated on holistic alignment instead of your ability to, like, bubble in Scantron sheets.
I would change everything. The Pramod Effect essentially acts as a roadmap to shift human civilization away from hyper-specialized competition and move us toward deep integrated cooperation. It demands we stop staring at individual puzzle pieces and start building the whole picture.
It really is a massive paradigm shift, but, it does leave us with a pretty heavy question to chew on as we wrap up.
Oh, definitely.
If our future education systems actually manage to successfully neutralize all ideological binaries into a single unified, modified truth, who ultimately gets the power to define what that universal truth looks like?
That is the big question.
It is. Just something for you to mull over.